Good afternoon.
I'll be reviewing Matthew chapters 13 to 17. All right. Now, out at sea, Jesus had gathered a great crowd of the general public. Now, toward the general public, Jesus had then spent time speaking of parables. Now, amongst the 4 parables, Jesus had spoken of the first, the parable of the sower. A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path. Birds came and devoured them. Some seeds fell on rocky roads where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil. When the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they had withered away. Now, there was another soil, or other seeds had fell among thorns, and the thorns grown up, and choked them. Despite it all, we have other seeds that had fallen on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Now, after spending time spreading the gospel or spreading the parables to the general public, Jesus' disciples had questioned him. Why do you speak to them in parables? To which Jesus then responds, he was teaching them differently. Once again, the general public did not have the same opportunities nor the same wisdom as Jesus' disciples. Due to this, Jesus says, this is why I speak to them in parables. Because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. From this, we can understand that Jesus, no matter the outcome, will attempt to make sure you can understand the story, no matter how he has to word it. Once again, he would explain a story in a way that is most comprehensive to you. Now, back to the parable. What does the parable of the sower mean, right? A sower went out to sow, and he sowed. Some seeds fell along the path, and birds came down and devoured them. From here, this is a direct reference amongst those who follow Jesus. However, they do not truly understand him. They do not truly attempt to listen to him. Therefore, not a true faithful follower. In addition, we have seeds that fell on rocky roads, did not have much soil, they sprang up since they had no depth of soil, and when the sun rose, they scorched. They had no root, and they withered away. From this, we have a reference towards someone who had initially had so much joy following the path of Jesus. However, the moment they were met with hardships, they backed away. They got scared. Once again, not a true follower. Now we have other seeds that fell among thorns, and thorns grew up and choked them. From here we can inference that these thorns are materialistic values. And from this, it was someone who had fallen to materialistic greed. You know, as well as anyone, that this is losing the path of faithfulness. However, we still have one more. Other seeds fell on good soil. They produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. Amongst those who hear the message and comprehend it, welcome the message, as well as practice it, they will then transform their lives for a positive outcome, especially for those around them. He who has ears, let them hear. From here we can inference that if you're willing to practice, if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to comprehend the words of Jesus, then you are welcome. Amongst the 4 parables, we then have the second parable, the parable of weeds. We then start this parable again with another sower. However, this sower had been planting seeds on his field. However, at night, an evil man had entered and planted weeds in his field. The next morning, the servants of the man had told him and said, had you properly planted these seeds into your field? It seems not, as there are weeds. What should we do with these weeds? The man then says, do nothing about these weeds, let them grow. As we let them grow, we will then harvest them, and when we harvest them, we will ask the reaper to then separate the weeds and the good seeds being planted by the man, the sower. Then, after separating them, we will put the weeds into a fire, whereas the good seeds will stay with me in my garden. If it wasn't obvious, this is a direct correlation to the gates of heaven, right? The sower, man of God, had planted good seeds. Those who follow the path of the good seeds, or the path of man of God, will then end up in his barn, direct correlation to heaven's gate. However, those who follow the devil, planted by the devil, the weeds, you will end up in the fire, in the furnace. The other parable is the pearl of great value. Again, the kingdoms of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who, on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Here we can tell that he, the merchant, had sacrificed great deals of his own, materialistic greed. He had sacrificed his old self and many other things that he had worked hard for, just for one pearl. There is also one more parable, is of the net. This is, once again, another connection of if you were to use a net in the ocean and you were to pick out fish, you were to keep the good fish and let out the bad fish back into the ocean. Now, after saying these parables to his disciples, Jesus then asked them, "Do you understand me?" To which they replied, "Yes, we understand you." He says, "Therefore, every scribe who had been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who brings out his treasure for what is new and what is old." Jesus is telling his disciples here, do not forget your origins. The present would be nothing if not for its past. You would not be here if not for your origin, if not for your past. Jesus says, never forget your origin. Speaking of origin, when Jesus returns back to his hometown, Nazareth, he spreads the word, he spreads the gospel, he spreads his lessons, to which the people then grow skepticism of him. They ask, is this not just the common man? Is this not just one of our brothers? To which Jesus then says, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and his own home. What he really means here is familiarity results in disrespect and inconsideration.